Intelligence is sexy. This is the Brett Mason Show.
And welcome into the first ever podcast episode of the Liberty Report with Brett Mason. I am so glad that you're here. You may or may not be aware that I already do a podcast, the Brett Mason Show, which is pretty much pop culture, random thoughts, personal issues, whatever the issue of the day is, philosophy, life's big questions. But politics and primarily liberty is a huge passion of mine. And being an avid libertarian, finding really good sources of information and things that I think the average person could digest seems to be somewhat limited. I do seem to find a lot of resources for avid, diehard libertarians. And you'll go to these resources and you'll see pretty harsh is not the right word, but pretty extreme cartoons or the extreme end of libertarianism and in word, print, pictures, whatever. And I don't think the general public is ready for that yet. And so people would argue on means of distributing, converting, sharing, empowering people with the knowledge of freedom and liberty. And some think that you do it with a sledgehammer. I, on the other hand, think that you do it the way it happened to me. And the way it happened to me was I was a diehard Republican. I was the biggest Republican cheerleader that you ever had seen. And this continued up until a year or two after we started the war in Iraq. Maybe a year after we went into Iraq with Bush 2. And I had some questions about that. And so, finding Republican sources that had a, what I would call a fair, open-minded view about that, they were few and far between or non-existent. So the only places that I could find anybody who was questioning it at all was from libertarian sources. So I started consuming that information, and it led me to Ron Paul, who I'd never heard of before. And the more I read about Ron Paul, the more I liked him. The more I read about the tenets of libertarianism, freedom, liberty, all these kinds of things. It really seemed to me like that's what I thought that the Republicans were, but with your eyes open, you can clearly see that they aren't. And so it was a gentle nudge for me. And, after 3 or 4 years of just moving more and more and more towards being a libertarian, I finally arrived. And I think that's the way most people arrive at this concept of personal liberty and freedom and rights. And I told somebody the other day, because they were talking about rights, and I said, I reserve all rights. Every right that you could ever imagine, I reserve them and maintain them for myself. And they are extended to me, and I am entitled to them up until only the point to where they injure or harm or intrude on someone else, whether it be their life, their liberty, or their property. Up until that point, I reserve all rights. And that's a hard concept for people to understand. So if you're listening to the show today and you're somebody who just really isn't aware of the libertarian platform or what it means to be a libertarian, I've taken a few paragraphs from the official Big L libertarian.org website, which you can find at lp.org. Which is it's a few paragraphs about the platform of being a libertarian, and there's more things there, but I think these three sum it up. We hold that all individuals have the right to exercise sole dominion over their own lives and have the right to live in whatever manner they choose, so long as they do not forcibly interfere with the equal right of others to live in whatever manner they choose. To me, that seems like such a simple concept. As long as I'm not intruding on your right to live in whatever manner you choose, to possess whatever property you possess, to possess your life, your liberty, your freedom, your health. As long as I don't intrude on that, I reserve all rights. The only time that those get infringed upon is when they infringe on yours. Individuals should be free to make choices for themselves and to accept responsibility for the consequences of the choices that they make. Our support of an individual's right to make choice in life does not mean that we necessarily approve or disapprove of these choices. No individual, group, or government may initiate force against another individual, group, or government. And one of the most telling things to me was when I found, I believe it was Reid was being interviewed about taxes, where he said the federal income tax was voluntary. And the person interviewing him about that said, so if I don't pay taxes, don't you come after me and I eventually wind up in prison? And he's like, yeah, but they're voluntary. And I remember watching that day going, boy, if this doesn't sum up everything that's wrong with the country, I don't know what does. The government has come up with their own definition of voluntary, which really means we will take it by force and just use the word voluntary. If you've never heard that clip, it's highly enlightening. Reid is the Senate Majority Leader for several years under Obama. What was it? The second, third highest person in the country. Just listen to it. It's very eye-opening.
Well, I don't accept your phraseology. I don't think we force people.
Taxation is not forceful?
No.
It's voluntary?
In fact, quite to the contrary. Our system of government is a voluntary tax system.
Oh, if you don't want to pay your taxes, you don't have to?
Oh, of course you have to pay your taxes. But
well, the government will force you to pay, or they'll fine you or imprison you.
We have a voluntary system. The fact of the matter is that, in many other countries, it's not voluntary. For example, in many countries, the government makes sure that your employer takes out every penny. In many countries don't file income tax returns.
We have withholding here too, don't we?
Pardon me?
Withholding?
With some programs, yes. But I'm talking about in some countries, European countries as an example, because your employer takes all the money out. That's the difference between a voluntary and an involuntary system. You can't cheat and not pay your taxes.
Right.
But I don't accept your phraseology that you forcibly take money from somebody else and give it to others.
So if you can listen to that and make any sense out of it other than really that the government just does whatever it wants to and uses whatever terms, or to use Harry Reid's word that he made up, phraseology, that's what they do. They just do what they want and they make up words. We're going to force you at gunpoint under the threat of imprisonment to pay taxes, but it's voluntary. You can volunteer to pay them, or you can volunteer to be taken to prison. And people ask why are you talking about taxes? Don't you think there needs to be taxes? How does a government or a country provide certain services without taxes? Look, I think in a perfectly libertarian world where every aspect of libertarianism was to the nth degree, there would be no taxes. We would take care of ourselves. My community, if we wanted a road, we would get together and raise the funds and put the manpower in to build a road. We wouldn't need the government for that. If you think about what the government does, the government just requires you to pay them money to do things. You want to build a house? Well, you need to come get a permit. You need a permit to build a house. Has anybody ever stopped to question why you need a permit to build a house on your own property? You own the property. It's your property. But it's not really your property. Miss some taxes and see how long it's your property. It won't be for long. But, of course, taxes are voluntary. So, anyway, that's my introduction to libertarianism. And as these series go on, we'll probably do more about that. Maybe have some interviews about it. But the big issue this week is same-sex marriage. I have a lot of really, really religious friends and family who are blowing a gasket over this. This is the end of times. This is the sign that the country has gone off the cliff. The very foundations and core of our country have been shaken. Which blows my mind, because if you don't think the very foundation and core of our country has already been shaken up till now, you've been living in a cave somewhere. Like you had been walking around with a blindfold on and your fingers stuck in your ear going, la, 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 don't want to hear, don't want to hear. The core of our country was rocked a long time ago. You got to go all the way back to probably 1913 when, we started having a centralized bank, and then we had to force income taxes on people to support the centralized bank printing endless money, which causes inflation, which robs you every year in a way that you don't see. And we'll talk about inflation in another episode, because that's one thing I just wish everybody that I knew could understand inflation. I wish everybody I knew could understand how the government robs you of your money with inflation. But that's another talk for another time. Two men getting married isn't going to do anything to this country. Now, if you believe it's a sin, the only thing that will happen is those two people will go to hell. That's it. Nothing's going to happen to you. Nothing's going to happen to your grandkids or your cousin or your uncle or your wife. It will affect you in no way whatsoever. None. So I see these people shouting from the rooftops. It's just, oh God, the country is over. Oh God, help us. The country is one of the most illicit, disgusting, terrorizing groups that has ever existed. The government from the top down. They take money from you at gunpoint. They give it to other people who don't deserve it, didn't earn it. You work and tote the non-workers on your back for years and years and decades and pay taxes, and you can't get ahead because the taxes that you can see combined with the hidden tax, which is inflation, robs you of all of your wealth. And at the end of your life, the only thing you have to show for everything you've done is they give you a small pittance of Social Security that won't even sustain you. It won't even sustain you at all. If you add up what you give versus what you get back, it's not even close. That's what the government does. So there's problems with the government. There's huge problems with this country and its core and its foundations, and it doesn't have anything to do with two women getting married. It has nothing to do with that. Now, if you want to believe that's a sin, if your religion tells you that's a sin, fine. You can believe anything you want is a sin. And you know what? If you're a religious person and you believe something's a sin, you know what the answer to that is? Don't do it. That's just the answer. I think gay marriage is a sin. I'm not going to get married to another person of the same sex. Problem solved. You think lying is a sin? You think cheating people is a sin? You think embezzlement is a sin? You think all these other things? They happen all the time. They happen in the government. Your friends and family are doing most of those things. Lusting after other people, coveting what your neighbors got. Fornication. Oh my God, the list goes on and on. Gluttony, pride, boastfulness. All these sins are going on all the time, yet none of those are bringing the country to its knees. None of those that everybody does. Everybody does all of those. And that's not going to bring the country to its knees. Less than 10% of the population doing a sin is going to bring the country to its knees. That's the most preposterous, far-fetched thing I've ever heard. Like, how does that even make sense in your head? My mind is blown that people believe that. So, my position on it has always been that it has nothing to do with the government. There's two aspects to marriage, okay? There's two aspects to marriage. There is the religious aspect to marriage, which is what originally marriage was. That's where marriage came from. It's a religious tradition, sacrament, whatever you want to call it. And now the government is involved, so there is a contractual part to marriage, and the government authorizes it and recognizes it, okay? Your church recognizes the religious aspect of your marriage. It recognizes that you are in a holy union with a spouse, which entitles you to all the benefits of being a spouse, whether they be financial, emotional, sexual, whatever. So you're completely within the framework of your religion, the church recognizes your union. So you got that part of it. But there's a whole other aspect of marriage, and this is what people don't understand. There's a part of marriage that has nothing to do with your religion or your church. It is a contract between two people that the government authorizes with a marriage license and then recognizes later down the road. And what it says is these two people have chosen to enter into a binding contract with each other. They share all possessions jointly, and upon one of them's passing, they have the right to they own everything that their spouse owned when they passed. It also gives you right to your children, your possessions, your family, things like that. So, gay people could have went out and had a ceremony. There's nothing that stopped them from that. They could have a ceremony with somebody that agrees to preside over it, and they could be married. But the contractual part of it would never be recognized, which means in this country, where supposedly we value liberty and freedom, two people are not allowed to enter into a legally binding contract to where one of them has all of the other one's possessions should they die. Where one of them, if they have children and they choose to leave that other person their children to raise once they die, they can't do it. They just can't do it. The government doesn't recognize it. The courts don't recognize it. Nobody recognizes it. And that's happened all over the country. You've had people, there's stories of people, gay people who are in relationships for 2 or 3 decades, 20, 30, 40 years or whatever. You've had, and they died, and the person's family, who had disowned them, by the way, for being gay, completely disowned them, wouldn't have anything to do with them. They come in and get the property at that point because they're the heirs. They're the living relatives. And the person who that other person chose to spend and share every aspect of their life with, they didn't get any of that. It was taken away from them. You had instances where couples had kids and one of them died, and they were raising the kids as a couple, and the one person's sole wish would be for their partner to continue raising their child when they died, and the other family, again, many times, family who'd completely disowned them, not always, but sometimes, suddenly they have the kids now, and they will completely shut that other person out. The person that your daughter or your son loved more than anything, who they chose to spend their entirety of their life with, who they chose to share all of their possessions with, who they chose to share the responsibility of raising children with, that person who was your child, your son or your daughter, that was the decision they made. And when they die, you swoop in there, not only take all that stuff away from them, you block that person out, file restraining orders against them. You don't let them see their kids. They're out of your life. They're done. That person's left hanging. That's the contractual part of marriage. Okay? So, I agree that the ruling was wrong in this sense. The government should never be involved in marriage, the joining of two people in a religious type matrimony, because the government can't, and that's not for gay people, that's for anybody. The government can't do that. They don't have any religious authority. They don't have any authority by God. They just don't have the authority. That can only come from a church. So there needs to be a separation to where if you go to a church and it's their religion and they recognize marriage, they can marry you under the banner of their church. You're not forced to marry people you don't think should get married. That's against your religion. You don't have to. If I, on the other hand, go to a different church and they'll marry me and under circumstances that this other church wouldn't, that's fine. That's everybody's personal business. That's their personal decision. That's between them and their church and their God. It's not up to you. It ain't got nothing to do with you. So that handles the religious aspect of it. So then it goes back to being a religious institution first and foremost. Then secondarily, there should be legal aspect to it that should be completely separate. And that you would apply for with the government. And it really sucks that the government would even need to prove it, but you just would need it for a record. You just need a record of it so when one of you dies, your wishes can be carried out and it's legally binding. So you get the contract and call it whatever you want. You wouldn't call it marriage. You could call it whatever. But it would apply to straight people and gay people equally. So anybody could enter into this contract, whatever it be called, with another person, and that would join them forever until they chose to disband that agreement, which they'd have to go through a legal proceeding to get it disbanded. That way, the sanctity of marriage is kept within the bounds of the church. Problem solved. The government shouldn't be involved in marriage. Some of the greatest libertarian minds of all time, my personal hero, Ron Paul, he has pretty much the same thoughts on it. This is what he had to say recently.
I see marriage as a sacrament, but not everybody wants to see it as a sacrament. But why is the government involved in a sacrament? Okay, we're going to have a license, for you to participate in this sacrament. Well, baptism for many in this country still, baptism is a sacrament, but we don't go out and get a license. And the question comes up, well, why have we succumbed to this, to accept this idea that none of us can get married? And looking into this, I find out that this came about from the Civil War. And it came about because racism existed, and it came out because they wanted to prevent blacks marrying whites. And that particular understanding was reversed in 1967 by the Supreme Court. But it isn't so much that the court's supposed to sort these things out. If we lived in a libertarian society, a free society, that would be out of the way, and you'd be allowed to make up your own definition, do whatever you want, as long as you didn't exert aggression against somebody else. And then those who believe in traditional marriage could have their traditional marriage and get married in the church, and those who want a secular marriage can do that too. But I don't think we're anywhere close to that today.
And that's pretty much the same opinion I have. I mean, that's not really the only opinion you can have as a libertarian. It really is. I mean, you want the government out of personal things like that. Why is the government in it to start with? And you handle it on a local, or if it's a religious thing, you handle it in the church on a religious level. And then the contractual government part of it, that's separate, and that can be handled. Which is almost the exact same thing his son said. His son said it a little bit different way. Rand, who's trying to get the Republican nomination for president, said it a little bit different way, which has got him in a lot of hot water, but he's basically saying the same thing. This is what he said in an interview not too long ago.
I believe in the traditional religious connotation to this, but I also believe people ought to be treated fairly under the law. I see no reason why, if the marriage contract conveys certain things, that if you want to marry another woman, that you can do that and have a contract. But the thing is the religious connotation of marriage that has been going on for thousands of years, I still want to preserve that. And you probably could have both. You could have both traditional marriage, which I believe in, and then you could also have the neutrality of the law that allows people to have contracts with another. So
I think it's pretty clear, if you are a liberty-minded, freedom-minded person, that there really is only one solution to this problem, and that is to take the government out of marriage completely. That's why I think the ruling is wrong, because it should never have been a ruling. There should never have been a need for a ruling from a court on it, because it shouldn't have been a government issue to begin with. That being said, since it has been relinquished to the government wrongly, the only recourse people had was to go to the courts. So while I don't agree with it, and it should have never been there to begin with, they were forced to go that route because they had no other choice. People were forced to do that. It was the only way for them to have redress of grievances. It's one of the great things about our country. So I hope you enjoyed this first controversial version of the Liberty Report. I am your host, Brett Mason. If you enjoyed it, you can share it. You can download the Brett Mason Show app, and I will put all these episodes on that app. So I do a different show called the Brett Mason Show, so I will now be having the Brett Mason Show released on that app, as well as the Liberty Report will be released on that app. And if you'd like to download that, it's in the Android and iOS app stores. Just search for Brett Mason Show. Peace, freedom, and liberty to y'all. I'm out.
Knowledge is sexy. This is the Brett Mason Show.